I was sitting there and I was like, I woke up today and, I was feeling great. I had a great start to my morning, had a good breakfast. I'm like, dude, this is going to be a great day. And then I sit down and decide to write about David Johnson for whatever reason.
That's self-inflicted harm. I don't know why you did that.
It is self-inflicted harm. It is 100% self-inflicted harm. And I don't know why I do it to myself. It just happens from time to time.
Pat, do you think it's more harmful to write about David Johnson or to draft David Johnson?
Probably to draft him at this point. I have drafted him in the 13th round of Underdog Best Ball Mania drafts. So,
exactly what we're just
I'm willing to do it. But
yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I've every time I've taken David Johnson, I've used my full 30-second pick clock because my finger hovers over it. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do this.
I swear to God, that happened to me this morning. That's exactly what happened to me this morning. And I'm like, okay, why did I take him? I have to find out why the hell I just drafted David Johnson. I'm going to have to write an article about it.
Do you think there's like a chance that Watson actually plays? Because that would make David Johnson, I think, mildly interesting.
Not for the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we talked about it briefly, in the chat, but I just don't see him being more efficient with Sean Watson. He just doesn't have those, high or these highly weighted targets or whatever, or usage. So, just sitting there and looking at it, it's like every time that you pair a running back with Sean Watson, he finds a way to make them either mediocre or terrible. So I know that you want running backs on good offenses. I've been a believer in that for a very long time, but I think certain situations, such as this one, could be, an exception to the rule.
I think it's tough to have running backs with Watson, but I think it's like more tough to have running backs with Tyrod. I just don't think they'll score like at all. I think it's going to be, I don't know. I don't want any. I'll still take Cooks because he's probably going to get a ton of targets. And I'm drafting Nico in round 18.
Me too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is Nico? I thought Nico was going earlier than round 18. Is that?
Well, he's going a little bit earlier now. Now it's kind of costing around 16, 17. But I'm fine with that. Like I never want to be crazy exposed to guys in round 18. So if the guys I was taking in round 18 start moving ahead and then I can't draft them anymore, that's honestly fine by me. Like that happened with Darrington Evans too. Mostly, I think, thanks to Eric Bime for. But
what do you mean mostly?
Are you saying entirely?
Entirely.
Yeah. It was very.
He asked for his ADP to be 3 rounds higher than it was. Then he got mad.
Yeah.
One of the best subplots of the offseason.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, I was such an Evans fan because I already had him on all my Dynasty rosters from last year, pre-draft stuff, and then I was really enjoying him in round 18. And then I saw Eric tweeting about it. I was like, "Oh, this is awesome! Like my guy's getting some hype." And then I realized quickly it was super not awesome because now I'm never ever drafting him. He's going ahead of Chuba now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't understand that at all. Not even a little bit. Like I understand the system and everything like that, but at least Chuba Hubbard is going to see some targets. I don't think that Darrington Evans will see near enough targets to make him that valuable.
I think he might. I mean, either way, like you're playing for McCaffrey to get hurt, you're playing from Henry to get hurt, right? Like that's kind of the. So, I don't know.
Well, they keep saying Evans is like got some Kamara in him, so it's probably just talk. But I think that part of the play on Evans is that he's you're hoping he'll catch passes because J.D. McKissic was playing a ton of passing snaps last year, and they don't play Henry on a lot of passing snaps. So theoretically, he could see a lot of passing snaps. I don't know if he sees many targets on those, but he could. So
I was shocked to see Jeremy Nichols' snap count on third downs. I was shocked.
Yep.
That was insane to me. That was probably one of my mind-blowing moments ever of research was seeing how many snaps he got on third down versus Derrick Henry.
It's weird where it's almost the opposite of most teams where sometimes when they're actually down a couple touchdowns, it almost seems like they're more likely to play Derrick Henry on third downs. Like I've seen where they go into warp speed and they're like, all right, we're just going to ride the big dog now that we're down a touchdown in the fourth quarter, which is like the opposite of every other team. It seems like where the guy gets benched. I don't know. I've not drafted a lot of Henry these days just because of the price. And I mean, he had the best running back season I think he could possibly ever have. And he still was exactly what his ADP is right now, which I think we're going to get into. So why don't we hit the break and we will start right up.
Yeah, this is weird. We don't have an awkward time to time out on it. You haven't.
No, I'm not giving you anything. I'm not giving you any bad content of you saying something offensive this time before you hit the music. I'm not doing it again.
is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Shane Manila, Jacob Sanderson, and Chase Vernon.
All right. Hello, and welcome into a special episode of Dynasty Intervention. It's going to be about half Dynasty Intervention, to be half best ball intervention. First thing you might notice today is that Shane Manila is not with us today. So shout out to Shane. He's off gallivanting around with his other podcast, Dynasty Trades HQ, that you can listen to. But we are joined by a special guest today, Pat Kerrane from NBC Sports Edge. And he has been churning out fantastic content all summer long, especially with regards, of course, to zero RB, running back strategy, best ball strategy, and all the works. And we're going to talk a lot in today's episode about one of his most recent articles about why the dead zone starts at 1.1. Pat, how are you doing, and how have you enjoyed your summer of fantasy content so far?
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's been like maybe the most interesting summer ever because of all of the best ball. Right, I've never played this much best ball. I'm not like prior to last year. I didn't really play much best ball at all. I started getting more and more into it as the summer went on, and then this year, I feel like we've been drafting intensely for months.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild, Like this was used to be like 10 years ago, the start of the fantasy football season, and we're already like deep into it. So it's been a really fun summer of fantasy football drafts, and excited to talk some fantasy football to you guys tonight.
It's so weird seeing that it's like not even August yet, and then looking at how many best ball drafts I've done. Like I remember when I first started doing best ball drafts. First it was on draft, and it was like I'd start mid of August. I'd go to draft.com and start filling out a couple teams. I don't remember any of this last year. Like I wasn't obviously as involved in the space, but I don't remember any of this last year about all of sort of the macro level discussion about structures and strategies. Like I remember it was very, very limited compared to this year in terms of all of the different stuff that is out there for people to read about how to structure all these different teams. And you can really see it, especially on Underdog, where, you drop a podcast, you drop an article, and ADP shifts. Like we were just talking before we went to break about Eric and his Darrington Evans charge up the board. Like what's it been like for you this year where you're in a spot through your podcast or your written work where like if you say something or if one of your contemporaries says something that like you're going to see that move the next week?
I don't think we have that big of an impact. I think what happened like with the puppy ADP was that like it was during what is traditionally a dead period, and so all of the sickos were like, I'm going to max enter this. And so the ADP was like all of the people who are super hardcore in terms of consuming the content. And so during that period, I guess we had like a little more sway because it was generally people who are like listening to a ton of fantasy football stuff. But yeah, it's been kind of fun. One of the things that I thought was interesting this year as well is that because the ADPs have shifted pretty drastically, there's sort of different pockets of, the draft. And you kind of like need to understand like this week, the wide receivers really dry up in these rounds, or this week there's actually some running back value in this pocket. So understanding the like little micro, like sort of the tides of the way the draft rooms are right now is I've never experienced anything like this, but it's kind of fun to be in, if you have enough reps, you can start to pick that kind of stuff up.
I think that's such a huge advantage. Like I was talking to a buddy today about Michael Carter. And like early on, I was drafting no Michael Carter because I was like, I would way rather have Will Fuller. I'd rather have Curtis Samuel. I'd way rather have Laviska Shenault, all these wide receivers. And I don't know, it's like an ocean tide, like swept all these wide receivers way up the board. And all of those guys that I used to take over Michael Carter, it's gone. And now it's like Michael Carter versus Jalen Waddle, Michael Carter versus Devontae Parker, Michael Carter versus Russell Gage. Like what have you noticed, like you're saying with that massive shift, like it's totally changing what players you're even taking in certain spots where it's just the decision points, the opportunity costs are way different. Hey?
Yeah, no, I think you need to weigh that, not just in terms of like, who am I going to take now? Because like you said, it's Michael Carter versus Waddle, not Michael Carter versus Laviska. But then if you know that that's going to happen, now you can structure your draft a little bit differently to say, like, I really don't need to take a running back in the 3rd or 4th round because I can get Michael Carter in like the 8th or 9th round, and there's not going to be a wide receiver that I really want there. And then I can also, like, the running backs available in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th are pretty juicy. So it allows you to do some interesting stuff. Like early in the like back in June, I was doing a lot of 1 running back early and then 5 total. And now like you can do 1 running back early and 4 total, much easier, but like kind of with the same idea in mind, where like I'm still skipping, like let's say I go running back round 1, you can still skip running backs all the way through until like round 8, you grab a second one, then you can grab, another 2 in like between rounds like 9 and 12, where you wouldn't have felt that great about those running backs in a 4 running back build. Or Eric was doing that. He loved it, but most of us wouldn't want to be doing that or feel as comfortable with that type of build because of the quality of the running backs. But the quality of the running backs in those ranges is so much better. So you can actually build that into the overall structures that you're using.
Yeah, we're going to get into plenty of that market environment. We're going to get plenty into best ball today. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the news. And Chase, we haven't checked in with you today. How are you doing today?
Oh man, I think we talked enough about it pre-show. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip that whole conversation about David Johnson. We're just gonna leave that on the side. But I'm doing all right. I actually, did a few best ball drafts today, and I took screenshots of MVS's ADP. I took screenshots of Jerry Jeudy's ADP. A lot of like the pieces where Aaron Rodgers was expected to move to Denver, and I'm interested to see if any of those shift significantly over the next like week or two, because I definitely had a good amount of shares of the MVS, and I'm looking forward to have some shares of Jerry Jeudy before the season begins.
That's for sure. I remember there was a time where I was doing the Galaxy Brain, Rodgers, Sutton, Jeudy, Fant stuff like back in July, just in case, but things have changed. Let's quickly address. I mean, everybody's had a take on this, but Rodgers back in Green Bay. I think the most interesting thing to me is where do Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams go? Because I have been drafting the shit out of Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, to be honest, just to try and collect some of that expected value bump whenever I can get them in the late second. Pat, where would you expect once sort of the ADP fully bakes in Aaron Rodgers being back and, people start drafting ahead of ADP because there sort of ends up that lag where people aren't looking down the screen? Where do you think, 2 weeks from now, we're going to see Jones and Adams?
So I think in a world where Best Ball Mania started tomorrow, you would maybe see Adams, going ahead of Tyreek Hill in some drafts, right? Or going ahead of Stephon Diggs. I think that people are going to be a little bit less interested in doing that just because they're competing against a bunch of your teams that have second round Devontae Adams, have some really interesting pairs. So it's a little bit of the Darrell Henderson thing where I think Darrell Henderson's being drafted right now in these drafts, like probably around maybe 10 picks or something like that. Later than he otherwise would be, just because there's a lot of people passing on him that wouldn't be if they weren't competing against 11th and 12th round Henderson. So it would be a smaller effect than that, but I think it'll keep Adams from moving up to where I don't think you're going to see a ton of Adams at the 103 in Best Ball Mania. And like, if
so how about like the
kicking off
too?
Tomorrow, I would be kind of the puppy too. I think you will see some Devontae Adams at the 103. I think you'll see that occasionally. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Like I've taken a couple Diggs 103 teams. Chase, where for you, like are Jones Adams, they first round picks for you in sort of like a brand new setup if it's Puppy 2 and you're not competing against Adams round 2 teams?
Well, first off, I have to give props to Aaron Rodgers. I was actually, on the horn with Cooter Doodle earlier today, and I was talking about how Aaron Rodgers was pretty much doing what Cooter Doodle was doing as she, would reach into a mayonnaise jar with her hand and, rub it on some bread or whatever the case was. It was a complete troll job, essentially. And Aaron Rodgers was playing the media. He was playing Green Bay Packers, fans. He was playing everybody. And it was just hilarious for me to watch it from start to finish because I literally felt like I was watching Cooter Doodle just do stuff that is completely repulsive to the average person. Like, it was amazing. And sitting there and watching it, I'm like, dude, I'm watching the male version of Cooter Doodle. And I told her that today. So I loved it, man. I loved every second of it. So sitting there and looking at, some of these options, I kind of want to see where A.J. Dillon actually goes to, because people are going to be hyper-focused on Aaron Jones. We could see Allen Lazard come up the ranks a little bit. We could see MVS come up the ranks a little bit. So this actually could put a little bit of a spin on A.J. Dillon, who would be, hyper efficient. We talked about good offenses with running backs on good offenses. A.J. Dillon could have some massive weeks moving forward if he has the Jamal Williams role. He's a better running back than Jamal Williams. He can be far more efficient. I'm excited. I'm genuinely excited to see A.J. Dillon. And if he starts to fall, I've already seen it a little bit today. If he starts to fall more and more often because they think that Aaron Jones is going to take over the main workload and A.J. Dillon doesn't catch passes, so guess what? He's not going to be relevant in this Packers offense. Dude, I'm wheels up with that.
Yeah, shout out to Andrew. First of all, said preach the zero RB mantra, Pat. I think Dillon's got two things working in his favor right now. I think that obviously Rodgers coming back is definitely helpful for Dillon. And I think that the Cam Akers injury might have some spillover effects for Pollard and Dillon's ADP. I think that the people, I was drafting all these different teams where I would take Pollard and Henderson and Dillon, or at least two of the three of them, to try and capture that early offseason upside in case something happens later. I wrote about that on Player Profiler. You can catch that piece on Henderson moving forward. Obviously, Henderson's off the board now. You can take him earlier. I'm like Pat said, you're competing against round 11, round 12 Henderson teams. So he's pretty much off my board entirely, but he's especially off your board round 10, 11, 12. I think the people that wanted to take Henderson there, they're going to be looking for Dillon. They're going to be looking for Pollard. I wouldn't be surprised if you start seeing A.J. Dillon creep up into the 9th in some drafts. I don't know. Pat, what are your take is on Dillon?
I love Dillon.
Yeah,
Dillon's the perfect guy because, and Ben Gretchen's been all over this. He's been talking up Dillon for a while. Dillon has a rare mix where there could be no injury to Aaron Jones and he could pay off his ADP pretty easily.
Independent
and
values.
then if there is an injury to Aaron Jones, he actually would see potentially a workhorse role. He wouldn't take over all of the passing down work and stuff, but I think he would get a little bit more of that. I think he would get a little bit more of a Jonathan Taylor type of profile. So there's both contingent value here and usable weeks. You don't generally find that this late in the draft. So I have a lot of A.J. Dillon. I'll continue to be hammering him. Yeah,
I agree. The only reason I don't have more Dillon is because I was drafting so much Jones, and I almost regret it because I'm never going to take the two of them on the same team.
Right.
But definitely I'm into Dillon here. Let's quickly touch on the other big piece of news. Michael Thomas, of course, now is going to be sidelined for potentially up to 5 weeks. Who knows, maybe even more, with the ankle surgery they got in June. Specifically from a best ball point of view, I'm sort of torn in a sense with Thomas. Of course, in standard 12-person leagues, you're just taking 5+ weeks off the board. But I got to say, as someone who's pretty into positioning their teams for the fantasy playoffs, the thought of getting Michael Thomas 3-4 rounds after a bunch of other teams have Michael Thomas, and if I could just find a way to get into week 15, 17, and now I have Thomas both at value in terms of where I actually drafted him and at value versus other Thomas teams, I personally find it appealing, but I've also seen a lot of people that have been way off Thomas. Curious, Pat, what's your approach with Thomas right now?
I'm pretty off Thomas at the moment. I think there's enough that we don't know about the exact timeline. And I also feel like his ADP kind of has some more room to fall. So
I agree.
I think I'm
auto draft city right now. So
yeah. So I'm still going to compete against cheaper Thomas if I'm taking him at his current ADP. So I think once he falls down, if he falls down to where he's going near Waddle or he's going near Elijah Moore or something like that, then at that point it's a similar bet where you're just betting on a late season kind of breakout to help push you through. But at the moment, he struggled through this same injury last year. It was why he had such a down year. It could take him a while, not just to get back on the field, but to be a guy that's even hitting your lineup very regularly. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait and see where he settles.
I've got a weird question for you guys, and one of you will probably know, if not both. When it comes to the ADP for Underdog, right? How much does the recent 2 days or 5 days or week affect their current ADP versus 3-4 weeks ago? Because I know that there are some apps that end up, having a way heavier tendency to affect it over the past 2 weeks. There's some that affect it almost daily, where it's 60% of the ADP value is actually based off of the day before draft or the day of drafting. you guys know what the ratio is for that?
I'm not sure, but I think Underdog updates like a lot quicker than DraftKings, for example. I'm not sure.
I know that they update quick because I've done articles where I write it up in the morning and I have the ADP in brackets, and then I check at night to edit it, and the ADP's already changed. So I'm not sure exactly the formula of like how it's weighted between current day, previous day. But I remember, for instance, like I was writing the piece on Henderson, and when I wrote it, I was like, at his current ADP of like 127, and then it was like 2 days later it was published. It's like editor's note, his ADP is now 90. It's like, so you definitely see a quick shift. Let's just get into one last quick thing. Barkley, Cooper, now Curtis Samuel on the PUP. Preseason PUP list. How does that affect your approach for those players specifically? Are there concerns on those players, or would you just sort of lay off them because you're expecting ADP to drop more?
That's where I'm at with Samuel. I think let's see what kind of discounts provided. Cooper, it feels like the discount's starting to be there a little bit. I just kind of sit there in the fourth hoping Cooper comes back. He like never does, but that's where I'm at. I'm just like, come back and I'll grab him there. I'm not that worried about it. He seems to be, on track to be back like mid-August or whatever. It is a little concerning with Cooper because like, let's just say he was going to miss 2 or 3 weeks of the season. Like everything would happen exactly like it has happened, but I'm still optimistic. Like my gut is that he'll still be fine for week 1. Barkley, I don't think the ceiling case has really changed on Barkley. And so that's kept me interested, but I'm drafting enough of these that I want my discount, right? I want to be able to grab them at the 11, the 12, even the early second. But I will do that because I think, we saw from Adrian Peterson coming back from the ACL tear. He started slow, and then they eventually leaned on him. And I think that upside case is still very much in play for Barkley. This is an offense that's going to probably want to lean on Barkley. This is, an offense coordinator that might need to save his job, by 3-4 weeks in the season. Yeah. So I think that, the plans or whatever to bring him along slowly might go out the window pretty quickly if he's there health-wise. So I still want Barkley at the kind of the late first, early second ADP.
It's kind of funny, we sit here and Jacob, you and I go constantly back and forth on, the importance of PPR versus season-long value. And it's kind of funny to sit there and discuss the fact of missing a few games in the start of the season when, points per game, did I say PPR? I meant points per game. If, like just missing a couple weeks ends up affecting rankings so much. Obviously I'm somebody that wants to see somebody available for 16 weeks of the season. And I do weigh injury possibilities and injury concerns, pretty majorly. So Jacob, like when it comes to that kind of stuff, where are you sitting? Like, when it comes to some of these players who could miss 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And if you want to address this question too, like how is Cooper's ankle different from Thomas? I know he is ahead of
that one. I don't know, but I don't know if you or Pat or have more details on that. I don't know. All I've been doing is just reading the timelines in the Roto blurbs.
Yeah. Michael Thomas got his surgery in June. Yeah. And he's recovering from like the surgery right now. Amari Cooper is like basically back and they're holding him out. And it's like, it seems like very much a precaution with Amari Cooper, or, he's like 90% of the way there and they just don't want to risk it. Like that's
has he ever played in training camp anyways? This feels like this happens every year with Amari Cooper.
It could be a problem. Like they could be hiding something, but the comments overall seem like pretty bullish on his overall health.
Yeah. All right. I quickly want to pivot in here. So one of the big things I wanted to talk about today is that I've always been a huge fan of your work, Pat, over the years, and especially this year when, of course, I came across your article for NBC Sports Edge on saying don't draft an early running back without legendary upside. I really, really enjoyed this piece. I've been working on some similar stuff in terms of approaching specifically the dead zone with running backs. We need them. How are we going to get these guys and draft with a ceiling mindset rather than a floor mindset? And sort of where does that value come from? Because I have been continually enraged by, well, what if Josh Jacobs gets 220 points in round 5? Like that's pretty good value. And I have my certain take against that. I want to read a quote here from Pat's article. Running back upside is real and to a degree worth chasing, but don't forget the fact that you are walking through a minefield in search of it. The running back dead zone does not start in round 3. It starts the instant your fantasy draft begins. Can you please let us know, for anyone who has not read the fantastic piece, what do you mean when you say the running back dead zone starts the very beginning of the draft?
It begins the very beginning of the draft because the bust rates are actually worse in the early rounds of the draft, rounds 1 and 2, than they are in what we call the dead zone, rounds 3 through 6. So if you look at rounds 1 and 2, the running backs selected there over the last 6 years are busting 40% of the time. Like, that's a lot. And by busting, I mean have a sub 5% win rate in these PPR best ball leagues. So they're blowing a hole in the sides of these teams, where in rounds 3 through 6, you're still having much higher bust rates than the wide receivers, 19% of those running backs having those sub 5% win rates, which is really bad, especially because, that's a later pick as well. So those are still
just
very
for anyone
bad
watching really quick, when you're talking win rate, like your base win rate's 8.3%, right? That's like your average performance.
Right. That's right. Exactly. 1 in 12. So this is, right off the bat with one pick, you've decreased your chances significantly. And that is happening at a much higher rate, twice as high of the amount of guys that are doing that to you in rounds 1 and 2 compared to rounds 3 and 6. So the dead zone, the reason we think of it as the dead zone is because it lacks upside. Rounds 1 and 2 are even more dangerous than the traditional dead zone of rounds 3 and 6. It's just that in that range, there is upside worth chasing, but I'm basically saying you need to be cognizant of the fact of how dangerous these selections still are.
When it comes to that upside, one of the big pushbacks that I always get, like I was having a discussion after I posted my top 24 for best ball right now. And in that I had Stephon Diggs at my 1-4 overall. And one of the big pushbacks I got is, well, there's going to be a running back, probably even more than 3 running backs that are going to outscore Steph Diggs because it's a half PPR. How are we going to win a tournament without that? What's sort of your pushback to that? And how can you manufacture that same level of upside with a wide receiver start in round 1, or even, wide receiver times 4, wide receiver times 6, if you go into your draft?
Yeah, I think, the argument is basically like running backs outscore wide receivers in the early rounds on average, and then they don't anymore later. So it's like if you're passing on the running back, you're passing on the higher scoring position, and you're also giving up a positional scarcity edge. So therefore, you got to take the running back. But when you average all this stuff together, when you take Alvin Kamara's season from last year and you average it with Josh Jacobs and Kenyon Drake, it kind of covers up what's really happening, which is that you're getting a couple guys who are going nuclear. You're getting a couple guys who are scoring like, in that 25 PPR points per game range that is just changing the landscape of the season. And then you're getting a number of other guys that are hitting, but not in like huge ways. And then you have like a third group of running backs that are just absolute disasters. And so if you're trying to find that upside, I think you can definitely take a running back. I often build one elite running back in search of that guy. But the other thing with best ball is that we have weekly volatility here in play as well. So you've got wide receiver scores that are going to be more volatile than the running back scores. So even when you structure your team with early running backs, the successful structure is to only take 4 total so that you still have enough wide receiver points hitting your lineup. And so the wide receiver upside is also not fully baked into kind of average points per game, because we're trying to get points into our lineups. We're not just trying to draft the guys with the most points per game. So that's, I think, another key consideration. And then the other thing is that, you're talking about how you're drafting a ton of Darrell Henderson in the 11th round and stuff. Like, the idea that you can't have upside on a team that's got Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley, and George Kittle, and DJ Moore, and T. Higgins, and then you hit on a couple of these running backs, it's a massive upside team, because you're not necessarily competing against really high scores at the running back, right? A lot of these guys, if there's 2 guys that hit this year, the rest of your league and a lot of these teams in the playoffs actually have pretty moderate scoring at the running back position. They're not actually even scoring that many points in the running back position. So you can make up those points pretty easily. You're not going to catch the legends with the guys, in rounds 9 and 10, but you can find a guy who's going to score even with guys going in round 3 pretty easily. And then you're pairing that with gigantic spike weeks from these wide receivers that you're also not finding. Like, you're not going to catch Stephon Diggs and Tyreek Hill spike weeks with just a bunch of volume of Marvin Jones and the Traquan Smiths. Like, they do offer you more upside as well. So I think, like, I want to have a mix of both. I want exposure to these early round running backs with the profiles that I think can change the landscape of the season. But I am comfortable sitting back and taking, a zero running back build in best ball, if that's kind of what the draft gives me.
Yeah, I mean, if we sit there and we look at like the volatility of the wide receiver position, some of the wide receivers that you see, they don't finish as like top 12, although their ADP says top 12, but they're still going to finish at 14, 15, 16, pretty regularly. And you're going to get a lot of consistency with that area. My issue being is like, hey, if you're going to end up paying like this top end price, but yet there's a very slight variance in what you end up getting, why not go with a running back at that time that you actually believe will hit? And you called it, chasing the legends, I believe. So, sitting there and looking for these legends, they could hit. The likelihood of you doing so is, in my opinion, and this might not be fact-based, is slightly more towards the tail end drafts where you could be on a turn, where you have like the 9, 10, and then you have the 3, 4 overall pick, and you can go 2 running backs at that point. Now, do I want to go that direction? No, I normally end up going, running back, wide receiver, running back. But at the same time, I could see how one could hit and hit big if they end up drafting, let's just say 4 running backs. They get 2 of them in the first round, and both those end up, setting itself off. Last year, an example could have been Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry. I believe they were both going. I think Nick Chubb was towards the tail end or towards the start of the second round, and I think Derrick Henry was towards the tail end of the first. But
Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook was falling.
Dalvin Cook's another example because of the holdout, which I believe Jake and I were briefly talking about prior to the show.
Yeah, I think a running back start can certainly work. I wouldn't be doing that in managed leagues, but in best ball, there's ways that you can really make that work. I think you're way more likely to have a successful version of that by like hitting one of the guys, and then the other guy ends up being like, when I say hitting, like I think, let's say you go like Nick Chubb and Antonio Gibson. Like Antonio Gibson could absolutely smash. He ends up getting like all that JD McKissic reception volume. He's scoring long touchdowns, right? So he's the guy you need. And then Nick Chubb is helping you fill that running back spot every week. He's not going. I mean, Nick Chubb's got much more likely to kind of have a cap around the Derrick Henry season we saw last year. But that's still very helpful for you if you get that in the in the 1-2 turn or whatever. The thing is, then from that point on, if you get those 2 outcomes, the worst thing you can do is also then load up with a bunch more running backs because you're not going to get enough wide receiver scores into your lineup. So, that build works really well, especially with the current ADP. You just sit out. You just wait until like rounds 9, 10, 11. You get 2 more guys and you're done. And now if you are right about those guys, you're going to have a huge upside team. So it's not like, you have to take this many running backs here or all that. I mean, there's no like hard and fast rules. It's all just about structuring your team really smartly once you kind of lock into those early picks.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Oh, sorry, Chase.
No, that was actually going to be my next question. I mean, but we sit there and we look at it like, I wonder how much of like the research that you did when it came to bust rate and everything had to do with how drafts ended up laying itself out and the builds of those teams versus like the individual players actually having those bust rates. Obviously, you're going to have millions of teams drafted, so there is a very, very large, sample size of that. But right, Jacob actually had a good point to it earlier.
Yeah, I just one of the things that I've always talked to is sort of a counter when I've been discussing with people, how to do these structures, and I'll post my teams. And, usually I think there was one that I was posting actually where I started Kamara Gibson, which is a pretty rare running back start for me, but Gibson's there at the 210 and I just absolutely couldn't resist. And then I think I took Michael Carter in like round 9, and then I took Chuba, and that was it. And this was in BBM. And I love that. And for me, I was like, this is actually a little bit running back heavy because I have 3 by round 9. And the number one comment I got was like, why weren't you taking more in later rounds? And my argument was, look, if Kerrane and Gibson don't work out, like this thing is so done anyways, right? So I sort of have to think about it. How can I use these points most efficiently in my lineup? And I think if that's something that sometimes people miss out on, is a different. And people say, why don't you apply the same thing to wide receiver, right? Well, if you already draft 4 wide receivers, why would you draft a 5th good wide receiver? To me, the big difference is, and you can definitely let me know if you disagree with this, is the wide receiver usage is far more a factor of talent than opportunity, in the sense that the wide receivers, at least hopefully the ones on your team, are always on the field. So they're getting the opportunity theoretically anyways, but they have to force their own opportunity by actually drawing targets. And the reality is that a lot of guys you're drafting later just can't do that consistently. They can do that in a game-to-game basis, and they can get a lot more fantasy points per opportunity. So to me, the idea, okay, I forget who I had on that team. I had T. Higgins, I think was like my wide receiver 2 on that team, whatever. So it's fairly easy to envision a scenario where De'Ami Brown, who I took really late, might get 4 targets in a certain game, but I don't know, maybe he has 3 for 80 and a touchdown. Like, it's very easy to envision him outscoring T. Higgins in a given week with T. Higgins having a fine game. It's very difficult to envision if I take Tevin Coleman, like, if Antonio Gibson and Alvin Kamara are healthy and they're producing, like, what is Tevin Coleman going to do for me? How am I going to actually efficiently use his points in a lineup that's winning anything? Because if Gibson is hurt or he sucks and I need Tevin Coleman's points, then I'm kind of just dead anyway. And I think that people sort of misunderstand that difference between the running backs and the wide receivers.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. And once you take away like those couple seasons every year from the running backs that are just going absolutely crushing it, you know, that you think of the season and then you think of them, like 2017 Todd Gurley and 2019 Christian McCaffrey. Like, outside of those guys, David Johnson.
Yeah, your guy.
There you go. Not anymore, though.
So painful. I hate David Johnson. I hate him so much. And
He had his moment.
What a time.
Yeah. Outside of that, wide receiver is the higher scoring position. So you're taking the higher score. The reason why we're loading up on wide receivers is because we're loading up on points. And again, to the point of, you know, the volatility, which is exactly right. We're loading up not just on more points per game, but we're loading up on more points hitting our lineup. So, and despite Kamara Gibson's pretty juicy, like that's a high upside build for sure, but you're still at a disadvantage now, like a major disadvantage at wide receiver. So you're going to need that volume. That volume is critical for you to be able to catch up and stay close enough to the heavy wide receiver teams, even if, you know, because you don't want to be dead in the water if Kamara and Gibson are just good. You want to be able to, you know, still have a realistic chance of taking this thing down.
True.
Yeah, I could not agree more with that. Let's quickly talk here. We just mentioned Gibson. Who are the other folks that you're looking at if you're going to take a running back in the first 2 rounds that you can see the path where, all right, this is the guy who's going to compete with CMC and Dalvin Cook. He's going to draw even with these guys, and now I can build the rest of my roster to have an advantage over those teams. Like, who are the guys where you're willing to stand up and say, yeah, they're worth taking, you know, kind of semi-often?
I think CEH is a big one. CEH can get there. Like, so I'm working on an article now, a follow-up article to the Legendary Upside article, where I'm looking at the profile of the guys who've hit the seasons that we're actually looking to target. And there's sort of 2 profiles of guys. We've got 12 seasons over the last 6 years that really kind of fit this, but only from 8 different running backs. And they kind of break into 2 groups where you've got these receiving workhorses who had a goal line role as well, like Christian McCaffrey would be kind of the classic archetype, but also David Johnson, Saquon Barkley, Le'Veon Bell, you know, those guys where they're not like necessarily having these like highly explosive seasons, but they just are getting such huge receiving volume. And then you also have like the Todd Gurley, the Melvin Gordon, Dalvin Cook type, where these guys are scoring like 20 touchdowns a season. These guys are explosive playmakers. They're having hyper efficient receiving seasons. They're seeing less targets per game, more around 5 targets per game, where the other guys are seeing like 7+ targets a game. Kamara actually fits both just because he's insane. But there's kind of 2 ways to get there. And I think when you look at CEH, pretty easy to imagine him getting that huge reception volume where he's getting the 7.5, 8 targets per game, because like we're betting on like Mecole Hardman. Davis Maddock, I think, has his combined exposure to Demarcus Robinson and Byron Pringle, I think, is like 50%. Like, you know, he's just
has he abandoned his boy Hardman?
No, he also has Hardman a ton.
I thought he had Hardman on every single team. I thought he started.
He doesn't get him. He takes Braylon Robinson.
All 3 combined.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's kind of, and he has a ton of CH too because he loves it. But there's going to be someone who benefits from Sammy Watkins' departure here. They could kind of reconfigure the offense and have a lot more receiving volume to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So I think he's a pretty obvious one. Aaron Jones is someone that is somewhat interesting. He's not really ever gotten there in terms of the receiving volume. I wonder if with Jamal Williams now gone, he could get there. I think
That's
Barkley is another one where he's, he has done it. He is that archetype where they could just feed him in terms of the receiving volume. And in Best Ball Mania, maybe the fact if you can advance a Barkley team, pretty easy to imagine him being the guy you need in the playoffs. Like he's just getting fed with the reception volume. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is the other guy that really fits that second profile. Like if you want to think about who can be the next Melvin Gordon, who can be the next Todd Gurley, it's Jonathan Taylor, I think, because he was such a good prospect. He's so explosive. We've seen how he can have that kind of yards per route run of 2+, the way we saw from Gurley and Gordon, and we saw last year from Kamara, where it's like, that kind of yards per route run is elite for a wide receiver. And these guys are, because they're taking screen passes to the house, they're just super efficient in the receiving game, where he's not going to get like 7 targets a game, but he might get 5. And given how explosive he is, that might be enough. So those are like the main guys that I really think have the chance in the first couple rounds.
I was really waiting for you to say one that I disagreed with so that I could, pick one that you didn't like, or I could tear one apart, but I'm completely on board with you.
You like CH now, Chase? I thought you were a hater.
No, well, yeah, CH is probably the one that I would actually disagree with, but I can't like tear apart like the reasoning essentially. Mm-hmm. And I can understand why people take them. I'm not on board with that, and I'm not.
Well, let me say, I just argued with John Daigle where I took the Gibson side and he took the CEH side.
Oh, yeah, I'm on your side Gibson there. 100% on that. Like it's
I'm Gibson so hard, but
I have J.K. Dobbins and Deandre Swift above CEH though.
I don't know that.
We have J.K. Dobbins. Yeah, sure, he's not going to get the receiving work, but essentially he scored on 89.5% of his carries inside the 5. The Ravens are going to be inside the 5 a whole lot of the time. We're going to see the Ravens being a very high-scoring team this year, so he could see the same opportunity without Ingram getting in the way. I don't think that Gus Edwards, sure, he's going to take some work away, but you're still going to see J.K. Dobbins probably 70% workload share, snap share. I think that J.K.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so.
And maybe, I wish that I could be more into Dobbins. Like I love Dobbins. I think he's a way better football player than CH, and that's why I'm not taking CH. Is like every time my finger goes to the CH button, and I consider anyone else, I'm like the other guy's better at football, which is why I usually end up just taking Jefferson or AJ Brown or Metcalf or Kittle or whatever. But I don't know, like the Dobbins one, I just can't get behind the Dobbins thing because I think. Like, how many carries is he going to get? I do think he'll be efficient. Like, we could probably project 5 yards a carry as being very reasonable. But it's like, how many targets is he going to get? How many carries is he going to get? I don't know. I'm not in on Dobbins, but
we talked about the whole thing. God, I don't know why I keep bringing this up. But David Johnson earlier, how I want to see the weighted volume or the I want to see those premium targets, right? I want to see the premium touches. I mean, I want to see them get receptions. I want to see them see touches. J.K. Dobbins won't see the receptions, but he will see those carries at least minimum inside the 20, if not inside the 5. And going back, I actually watched the game film. There was only one where J.K. Dobbins either didn't show vision or determination in order to get inside of the end zone. Like he didn't.
He's great.
He's phenomenal at finding the end zone when he has the ball. Really good. DeAndre Swift is the other one. We've talked about Anthony Lynn.
I do love
Once
Swift.
Again, we go back to our David Johnson conversation. Anthony Lynn loves to sit there and target the running back. He also likes to work the running back to the outside. He likes to put the running backs in the slot. He wants to utilize the running back. He was a running backs coach. He knows the power. He knows their ability to break tackles and create yards. So he's going to get them every opportunity possible. When we sit there and we look at, I think it was Dave put up a tweet earlier where it said something along the lines of, are we going to start putting Jared Goff into quarterback 1 territory if Hawkinson is going to be a wide receiver 1? And I mean, Hawkinson's going to be a tight end 1 and Swift is going to be a running back 1 because of his targets, and everybody's favorite sleepers are X.
Yeah, Dave hates the Lions. He hates them.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, right? Because he's a Bears fan. But sitting there and looking at it like this, regime of Kirk Cousins, right, put up 2,750 yards when we talk about Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, right? And then, they put up 27 touchdowns if you include Irv Smith Jr. it was absolutely insane. When we sit there and we look at the possibilities that could happen with Anthony Lynn, we could still see Deandre Swift with 600, 700 receiving yards. We could still see him with 6 touchdowns. Hawkinson, we can see with, on the high side of things, on the ceiling, like 1,200 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns, like a Travis Kelce, bad season essentially. But sitting there and looking at it like, they would still never touch that peak. So Deandre Swift is somehow going to have to get utilized in the passing game. He's going to have to. There's no way that Amon-Ra St. Brown and Tyrell Williams are going to put up even probably 600 yards apiece. Like, we're going to have to see something. We're going to have to see a minimum of 600 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns out of Deandre Swift, and I think that's a bare minimum. Plus, they had a top 10 offensive line when it came to efficiency last year for the running game. Like, and then they had Penei Sewell. Like, you're talking about a massive upgrade in the offensive line, on an offensive line that was already top 10. So now you're talking about a receiver or a running back that gets a running back friendly coach or offensive coordinator that's calling the plays. And now we sit there and we look at the fact that he's got a better offensive line than what he had last year, and he was highly efficient last season. I love DeAndre Swift moving forward. I think they could easily finish as a top 12 running back, like with his hands tied, one hand tied behind his back.
I'm super interested to hear what you think of Swift, Pat. I've been getting super into him, mostly because the opportunity cost me so much lower, and thus like the ceiling I need to, in my opinion at least, is lower. Like, I'm not having to draft him over wide receivers that I think have a super large chance to be a top 5 wide receiver. Like, I'm now pretty routinely getting him in round 4, even behind like that Robinson, McLaurin, Cooper, Lamb tier. So to me, it's like, if I can take Swift, and now I'm choosing between him and like the DJ Moore, Tyler Lockett, Bucks wide receivers, that kind of zone. It's like, to me, if I'm drafting in round 2 a running back, I'm painting myself a picture of, okay, how can I draft a round 2 running back that aligns with the production of a round 1 running back, hitting, their median to good outcome. Whereas if I do it in round 4, I'm just sort of thinking, now can I create the same team that other teams are doing with a round 1 or round 2 running back, but I'm doing it with a round 4 running back. So it's like, I don't actually need Swift to break fantasy, but what if Swift is just Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's median, but now I'm getting him at the 4.3 instead of the 2.10. What can I do with that? How can I have wide receivers that complement that? Where now it's sort of, I've been calling this the hyper dead zone, where I basically build a hyper fragile team, but I take, instead of, Kerrane Gibson, right, as my RB 1 and 2, I'll take Swift as my RB1. I'll take Etienne or Javonte as my RB2, and I will just trust that they both outperform their ADP and give me that solid, running back 1, running back 2 production. Add 2 more between 9 and 12, call it a day, and I've invested, not a whole lot in running back. And then I'm able to have a massive advantage at wide receiver. I can mix in an elite tight end, elite quarterback without sacrificing as much as wide receiver versus those hyper fragile builds that a ton of people are doing. I'm curious what you think on that idea.
I love that idea. And, I read your article about, finding upside in the dead zone. You mentioned, the youth being a factor there. And all 12 of the seasons that we got, these legendary seasons, they were all 25 or younger. So youth, I think, is something you really want to keep in mind when in search of this upside. DeAndre Swift, I think, is really interesting. He's a little Antonio Gibson-esque, where Antonio Gibson can hit as the receiver, or Antonio Gibson can hit as like the next Melvin Gordon type. I think DeAndre Swift is similar, where DeAndre Swift can be hyper efficient on the volume that he gets because, like you said, Chase, the offensive line is actually pretty good, and they might feed him to like, a 5.5 target per game range. And then he might just go off from there and just, get in the end zone a ton and just be kind of the engine of an entire offense, the way we see with like a Christian McCaffrey. But there is a possibility, just because they don't have any receivers, where like, what if Hawkinson fails? What if Hawkinson isn't up to the task? Like, what if Perriman?
We don't say that.
It's possible.
You got to think it through. Yeah.
I don't know. What if he sprains an MCL, right?
Yeah. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think there's pretty big upside for Swift. He's like the one guy, and I am taking the rookies some, but I'm generally like with the rookies. Well, I shouldn't say it. With the rookies, I've also done like kind of like one elite running back builds, but the running back isn't actually elite, and it's one of the two of Javonte Williams or Travis Etienne. That feels a little thin, but I really like doing it with Swift. Or like you're saying, you can just go hyper fragile starting with Swift. And I think you could even go like Swift and like you would maybe with a CEH, wait all the way until like round 8, 9, 10 for your second. And I think that's
a big dog turning lineup, to be honest. I don't know if I'm doing that in anything other than a big dog.
Really? I think I'm doing it most in BBM because there's so many
BBM.
entries. Like,
this is BBM where you're trying to have a team, because if Swift
BBM makes sense.
Yeah, if Swift hits the upside that we're looking for, you're also not giving up like that high of a chance of advancing. The win rates and the advance rates for 0 running back teams were awesome last year on Underdog, and they've been really good for years in these PPR best ball leagues. So like, if anything, I think like, I don't know, having a ton of wide receivers who score a ton of points and are hitting your flex is actually pretty safe. So like if you're just trying to advance, it's actually pretty safe to have a lot of early wide receiver picks. And then your hope is that, over those playoff weeks, Swift just goes nuclear and he's the guy that you actually need.
I keep getting locked into this idea because I don't know, maybe I'm galaxy braining too much because I spend too much time thinking about it, but I'm always thinking about like, how can I play off the structures that people are drafting and make, a small tweak to gain that extra edge. And that's what I like about it is when I think about sort of the hyper fragile builds, like one of the things that I think you really lose out on when you do that build where you start running back, and then, maybe you add a third, but you add like somewhat early, but you stop at 4, is I think you completely lose the chance to add an elite quarterback or tight end because you start behind the 8 ball at wide receiver. If you're not drafting one until round 3, you're already behind a wide receiver. So to me, then you need to start hammering wide receiver. And then by the time you're in round 5, it's like, I'm still behind at wide receiver. I probably can't add that Jackson or that Kyler, right? So to me, I think one of the nice things is if I start, Diggs, Ridley or whatever in round 1 and 2, and then I add in Swift, and then, I add in DJ Moore round 4, and now it's round 5. And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I already have 3 really strong wide receivers. I could venture out and grab Lamar Jackson. I could venture out and grab, Kyler, let's say, or Josh Allen, because I already have Diggs on this team. And I think that's a way you can sort of separate yourself a little bit. The structure to me is important. I want to quickly talk about the dead zone running backs. You're probably not drafting as much because people do draft Josh Jacobs and Chris Carson and Mike Davis and David Montgomery. If you were doing, like if you were on Pete's randomizer and they were like, you have to draft Josh Jacobs and you don't have a choice, what's the kind of build that you would build where you think he can actually make sense? Because I think that there are some, but I think the people who draft him don't do it that way.
Yeah, I think if you have to draft Josh Jacobs and you let's say you already have a running back, you get Josh Jacobs in the dead zone, then it has to be a hyper fragile. You have to, because you're giving up so much opportunity cost. I'm not willing to do Josh Jacobs single elite running back builds. That seems kind of crazy to me. So
that would involve being an elite running back.
Yeah, exactly. So you're hoping that the reason why hyperfragile works to some degree is because you're getting enough at the running back position. Like you're able to make use of the guys who only hit like kind of how Chris Carson hit last year. Like you're able to make use of that. And then you have the volume, you've got like 10 wide receivers that can kind of mix in. So I think Josh Jacobs can work in that hyperfragile build. I think you could also go Josh Jacobs and then pretty quickly after him, grab a second guy. Like you could go Josh Jacobs and Chase Edmonds, or Josh Jacobs. Yeah, Michael Carter, Raheem Mostert. You could get one of those guys in that range just a few rounds later, and then that's also a hyperfragile. So if you get like, I'm not doing Josh Jacobs hyperfragiles where I have Chuba as the 4th, but you could do Josh Jacobs as the first running back on a hyperfragile, and then 3 pretty quickly after him. I think that also works. You saw Mike Leone did something similar in Pros vs. Joes where he took Mike Davis as his first guy. Yeah. So that's like Leone specializes in taking the disgusting running backs that we don't want and then putting them in really smart teams that we have to
Wasn't he bumping Tevin Coleman earlier in the year?
Yeah. He was.
You too, Chase. Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks ago. I think buddy for like
18th round. I will not take him before the 18th round.
Now he has to go before the 18th. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, he's like the 14th now.
Dude, it's crazy. I was on today, and I'm like, how the hell did he get this high up? Like, I saw him go up to like
Mike Leone. That's how.
I was pissed, man, because I was grabbing him as like a flyer. Like maybe he'll give me 2 or 3 weeks where he ends up somehow
hamstring falls off the bone.
Jeez, man, the thing about the Jets, right, is they actually have a really easy schedule as it leads up to the playoffs. When a lot of these running backs, they hit week 8 and they end up getting injured. Like, I actually kind of want to do a article on this because I already subconsciously know it exists. But there's a lot of running backs that get injured right around like week 6, week 8, week 10 range, and they get injured for 3 or 4 games. They end up coming back in towards the tail end of the season. Happens every single year. So right in that range, the Jets, I believe, have a super easy schedule in some stretch. I think it's like a 4 or 6 game stretch. And I'm like, Tevin Coleman could be the perfect fill-in replacement after Mike Kirby.
Then you need him to get injured now so that he's recovered from his injury by then.
That's what I was saying about Raheem Mostert for the playoffs.
If you're going to bet on someone to get injured, Tevin Coleman's by 101.
Everybody's talking about.
I have a ton of Ty Johnson, so I'm just nodding.
Same.
Like, yeah.
Yes. Ty Johnson's in my top 6 most rostered running backs. Let's quickly move down a little bit deeper. So, like we're talking, you're probably not taking 3 really early. Once you move into what I'm now considering the wide receiver dead zone, kind of starting in round 9, where to me, like once you get past Fuller, Curtis Samuel, Antonio Brown, Brandon Cooks, then we start moving into this tier of some pretty dusty veterans. You got Marvin Jones in there, Devontae Parker in there, and then you've got sort of the high upside second-year guy like Michael Pittman, and then mixed in are, Waddle, Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman. That's where, I think it's sort of a nice area to veer away from wide receiver for a couple of picks where those guys are either kind of lower upside or a little bit riskier. That's where I like to usually get my running back 3-4. Who are your favorite targets in that zone, especially now that Darrell Henderson has left us?
Yeah, I still like some of the wide receivers. I especially like the rookies in that range. Mm-hmm. So I'll try to mix in, like I want some Elijah Moore. The other thing about Elijah Moore is that I'm often pushing it with the quarterbacks a little bit. Or at least I like to, have that as a potential option. If you take Elijah Moore, you can get a very, very cheap Zach Wilson.
But then you can't take Rojo.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You can't take Rojo. Honestly, I have less Rojo this year than I even want to. He's in a range now. Like part of the thing about Rojo is he's always been like 2 or 3 rounds after where I would like think he would go. And this year he's kind of going where I think he would go, which is, very disconcerting. I'm not used to it. So I don't really have actually that much Rojo this year, weirdly enough, because in that range, if I'm taking the running backs, like I want the guys who we know less about. Like I think we kind of know who Rojo is. I still think he's a very good rusher, and the numbers backed it up from last year, but he's never going to play passing downs. No. And so we really want guys who we actually just know less about. Like, is Zach Moss potentially a workhorse? Like, I don't know, probably not, but it's not crazy to think that could happen. It's not crazy to think in year 2 they use him around the goal line. We already talked about AJ Dillon. I mean, Tony Pollard obviously has probably the most contingent value of anyone in the entire draft pool. Michael Carter is a guy that, I really like the fact that he's falling more like into the 9-round range sometime, round 9. I don't know how good Michael Carter is, but I know he can catch passes, and I think the Jets are going to be better than people think. So he's a guy as well that I really like. And then often I will take like a Rondale Moore or a Bateman, and I'll let the room decide for me. They'll kind of push the guys down a little bit, and I'll just grab the guy who's left. If I have to take a Jamal Williams, if I have to take a Devin Singletary, that's fine because I was able to build out my wide receivers, 5 and 6 or 6 and 7 even. I'm also obsessed with Jacoby Myers, who goes shortly after this range. So I do take a lot of him.
That's rough for best ball.
I'm not a Jacoby guy, but I'm the worst nerd on Twitter because I don't draft a lot of Jacoby Myers. So shout out to my guy Cooper DFF, who's always getting mad at me for not drafting off Jacoby. Could you quickly pitch me on Jacoby in like 30 seconds?
Yeah, he had like as a sophomore, he had over 2 yards per route run, and he had a pretty good rookie year actually, to the point where I was like going into the year, I was like, this Jacoby Myers kid like might end up being better than N'Keal Harry. Like, and of course now that seems like
he definitely is.
Yeah, yeah. But I think Kendrick Bourne is like truly just a guy. Yeah. I think Nelson Aguilar looked like he was kind of done, and then he has this resurgence in Las Vegas, but he's got major drops issues, as we know. Like, I think he could wash out pretty quickly with Bill Belichick.
The drops don't matter.
Well, they might matter to Bill.
It might matter.
Yeah, and you're looking at targets with Jacoby. Like the target ceiling with him, if things break in his favor, is like way higher than the guys that he's going around.
Yeah.
All right,
so
that's
I
fair. I'll
actually-
draft a couple Jacobys. My guy, law firm guy, who I think was zoning around the chat right now. He's gonna love life because I texted him before. I was like, "Oh, we have a super sharp guest on today. Make sure to watch my show." And he's always bugging me about frickin' Jacoby Myers, so he's gonna be so jacked up right now that he's hearing this.
Yeah,
What were you saying, Chase?
A few times. No, I mean, I actually like Dustin Aguilar. I think that drops really don't matter, essentially, if you're talented enough to create space. However, there are certain players that really bother me with it because they don't get a high enough average depth of target to warrant the drops, such as, we're not
Deandre
even
Johnson.
going to do, yeah. I was just going to say, I'm not even going to name his name. But sitting there and looking at it, like, for that range, I'm going to say really quick that I think that Marvin Jones, could be a hit in this range. Wouldn't mind taking him. But I think that Rondale Moore is getting so disrespected. We sit there and we look at the, the percentage of motions and stuff that Arizona runs and how quick they run their offense. They don't run motions. They literally get up to the line of scrimmage. They hike the ball right off the bat. Rondale Moore,
bad.
yeah, I mean, he wants to get the play in fast. He wants to run a fast offense. Yet they're not even fast when they run their offense. They just don't motion a lot, and they don't do a lot of, pre-snap reads. So we sit there and we look at it. First off, you have the height, connection. You're going to have a lot of eye contact between Rondale Moore and Kyler Murray.
I love it.
Also, wow, I haven't ran a correlation on whether short wide receivers do better at short bars.
Eye contact.
Just
I love that.
you're going to have a lot of eye contact going on, especially in the huddle. You're going to end up, you're going to be like looking straight across the huddle.
That's why Drew Brees like throw to Lance Moore so much.
You're
not wrong.
Awkward to start off the season, but once they get used to it, it's going to be pure chemistry at that point. So we're going
to up my exposure.
We're going to get that in as a factor. But also, Rondale Moore doesn't need motions, right? Like, he's going to beat a guy, off the line of press, especially if it's a nickel cornerback. Meanwhile, you're going to have him also, like, if you're playing off him 5-6 yards, you're going to be able to work off screens. You're going to be able to work off gadget plays. I think he could end up possibly breaking the record for receptions in a season. That's right. I said he's going to break a record for receptions in a season. They obviously are making it very clear that they don't want to run the ball. I mean, when you bring in James Conner to be your starting running back.
I don't think they didn't do that. They brought him in to be a running back on their team.
Okay, whatever.
You know who I'm not drafting in rounds 9 to 12 is that guy. I'm not.
I have plenty of Conner.
I had him earlier. When he was going really late. I don't draft him much now though, because now there's like a 2-round difference between him and Evans. I think I'd rather just take Evans.
Oh, I've gotten him in the 12 in like the last week and a half because of that anonymous report pushed down his ADP a bit.
Okay.
I mean, all right, regardless, they're not planning on running the ball. They brought in AJ Green. They brought in the Madden 2016, All-Pro team, right? But then they added in Rondale Moore, who is literally the perfect correlation of what they would want to do with the running back. When we sat there, we watched Kenyon Drake run routes last year. He was running routes just to pull linebackers off so that Kyler Murray had space to scramble, right? When we watch, what Chase Edmonds did, he was running routes to actually get open, and Kyler Murray would end up going into sections as to where he would normally scramble and would draw the linebackers back. I think that Rondale Moore is going to fall right into that area where Chase Edmonds was running last year, except for he's way better than Chase Edmonds at getting open and, being a wide receiver because that's what he does. I think that Rondale Moore could end up breaking the rookie receiving record for receptions this upcoming year. And, I mean, he could end up having a Juju Smith-Schuster-esque season as to where it won't translate into a ton of plays. But when you're talking about this range, you don't need for that to happen. I know it's only half-point PPR, but you're still talking about some high-value targets, especially in the red zone. I'm not saying he gets in the end zone maybe 10 times, but 6 times would end up, sufficing in a best ball league where you could get, 2 touchdowns in multiple weeks.
No, I love Rondale. Real quick, and then I want to get to our last subject. Pat, who of the 3 rookie wide receivers, who do you find yourself drafting the most between Rondale, Elijah, and Bateman? They all kind of go in the same cluster.
I've been taking Elijah, even though he's the most expensive, because I know I can't get him later. Like when it comes to that range, I'm like, well, if I want Elijah, I got to take him here. But the guy that I actually want the most is Rondale, because so I wrote this article for NBC Sports Edge looking at rookie wide receivers in best ball, which have been very good over the last few years.
Yeah, it's weird.
And the thing you want to be targeting is efficiency. None of the guys are going to run like a ton of routes. Like Justin Jefferson ran a below average amount of routes over the course of the season. His workload increased as the season went on, but for the full season, he ran a below average amount of routes.
Mm-hmm.
we're going to see Rondale Moore. He's going to mix in. He's not going to get used on every route, but it's such a high volume offense that he probably will run like 32 routes a game. And like, you want to make a bet on who can be efficient as a rookie. He's got DeAndre Hopkins drawing coverage. You just talked about all having to respect Kyler Murray's legs, and he is perfectly suited for this kind of high yak role where he's going to be used in the slot. Like, this is exactly the offense that we wanted him to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So
100%.
I have a lot of Rondale Moore. I like Rondale Moore. Best ball, I like him in managed. Like, I want a ton of exposure to Rondale Moore this year.
I agree on Rondale. I think we all have Rondale. I've drafted more Bateman, I think, just because I think I like them both. I like Bateman slightly better, just because I thought he had a little bit more well-rounded profile as a rookie coming in. Yeah. And I guess I don't know. I think that the ceiling is higher in the sense that maybe I'm more willing than I think the market is to embrace the idea that the Ravens just pass a lot more than we think they're going to. And I think that if they do, to me, Bateman's the guy who I can envision him commanding 23% of targets pretty easily. And if that's 22% of, 450 pass attempts, then that's pretty good. But like, what if they throw it 500 times? Like, that's sort of where I just keep getting in. No, but then that's huge, right? Like, if Rashad Bateman comes in and, like Pat was saying, can win with efficiency. Okay? Like, if he gets 110 efficient targets in round 10, like that's fucking awesome, honestly. But regardless, I agree with all of these rookie takes, because I think.
I just want to say on Bateman, for like high stakes leagues and managed leagues, like, I love Rashad Bateman, because I think he kind of profiles as a guy more his role is gonna grow throughout the season. Mm-hmm. And we get to like rounds or into like week 8 and 9, and all of a sudden, like, Michael Pittman is all of a sudden a very valuable guy that everyone wants on their team, going for a lot off waivers. T. Higgins was dropped in a league, and we spent like 400 fab to get T. Higgins, in the early, like round like week 4 or 5, something like that. So like, all of a sudden these rookies, we start to see them emerge, and everyone's starting to get super excited. I think that's going to happen with Rashad Bateman. I think he could, down the stretch, have like you're saying, like a true kind of alpha role. He could be one of the guys that you're just so psyched to have in your starting lineup as you get into like the playoffs of these big money tournaments.
And then last thing, we've been talking about some rookies. And of course, usually this is a Dynasty show. I thought it was going to be a little bit closer to half and half. It's more like 90-10. But without Shane, once I kick Shane off the show, that meant I got to talk about best ball for a change.
Shane is not kicked off the show.
I'm
do that.
Joking. Yeah, Shane knows he's not kicked off, okay? This is how I make sure Shane watches. You know what I mean? I have to slander him. One thing I wanted to ask. So, Zero RB, when you go from best ball to Dynasty, obviously, like, all of that structural talk and stuff, that changes, quite a bit when you get into a Dynasty league with huge benches and you're keeping your team year over year over year. Zero RB, is that an ethos that you also preach in Dynasty? And if so, how does it really shift in terms of how you implement it?
Well, so, you could do zero running back in a startup, right? And I think that would be potentially a good way to go. Not that you would have to do that, but you certainly could. It's just that you're probably not winning the league that year, because you're competing against, the bar is going to be higher for what you need to win in a Dynasty league. You're competing against people who've been able to sell their first round picks. You're competing against people who are getting veterans at a discount, and are able to assemble like very strong teams in year 1. But like, I did win a Dynasty league last year with a Christian McCaffrey team, and Christian McCaffrey wasn't playing. And I don't tend to invest beyond my running back 1. This was a team where I had Myles Gaskin, I had Ronald Jones, I had Jeffrey Wilson at the end, and more importantly, I had Devontae Adams, Mike Evans, DJ Moore, and Travis Kelce. And so, like, you can build these super teams that you're expecting the elite running back to carry you to the title. But if you keep enough of your draft capital or enough of your total team capital in the non-running back positions, you can still, if you get lucky enough, beat everyone else with, even if your running back goes down. And so generally, like, the kind of the lessons of zero running back that I'm trying to keep in mind are like, We know a lot less about these running back situations than we think. A lot of these running back situations are really fragile. And so I'm trying to move off guys. Like I landed Mike Davis in a league. I traded off Mike Davis. Like I would love to trade Myles Gaskin as we approach the season and people start to, and his dynasty value starts to reflect his redraft ADP more and more and more. Like I want to be moving some of that capital that I found on the waiver wire or cheaply through trades. I want to move it out of the running back position, and then I want to put it, kind of store it in the wide receiver position. Like that's generally what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take, because the running back position loses so much value. Like I've got Christian McCaffrey on this team I mentioned. I'm probably not going to trade him. This team is very strong. So eventually Christian McCaffrey is going to go from like the 101, and within like half a season, he's going to be worth like a 7th round startup pick. Like it's going to, like the amount of value that I'm going to lose on this guy is like so gut wrenching. But that can still work. Yeah, Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon, like James Conner, like these guys, like they're just worth nothing. All of a sudden, they're just worth nothing. And so you just have to be managing that constantly. So it's not that you can't ever take, this team used to have Todd Gurley, and I was able to trade out of him in a big package in what end up getting Christian McCaffrey back. But Todd Gurley was a very small piece of that, not the centerpiece of that, because I held him to the point where his value had already mostly cratered. So managing your dynasty teams in a way where you're very strategic about how much of your total team capital is in the running back position is very important, I think. And then in general, I'm constantly thinking about how much of my team is desirable to the rest of the league. Like how much trade value do I have in this team? And people will go like, sometimes people will get a little tilted by that type of thing because they're like, oh, you're just trying to establish this like really trendy roster and stuff. But the thing is,
it works.
Yeah, well, personally, it does work. Yeah. But you don't know, like none of us know anything about what's going to happen in 2022. Like who's going to be scoring a bunch of fantasy points in 2022? Like we are going to be really, really bad at predicting that. If you have the flexibility with your roster to be able to maneuver when new information comes along, then you're going to be much, much better suited to score a ton of points in 2022 than if you kind of make your bets now. No one else agrees with you, and you're just like, I'm right. I'm going to hold these guys, and I'm right. Right. Well, like you're probably wrong because most of us are wrong about everything. So maintaining that flexibility is so key, and that's another reason to just limit the amount of capital you have in the running back position, because the running backs are the ones that people get real nervous about real quick.
I agree to an extent. Of course, my Twitter handle is RTDB. That mostly starts as like self-hatred because I cheer for the Colts, who want to establish the run at all times. So it's just like, it's mostly just ironic hatred of my existence. But then, also it applies to Dynasty, but it applies to Dynasty specifically in like the context of now. I think like I've been doing a lot of these running back heavy startups, but that's really on the basis of, like, I think my take on the 2020 running back class, even pre-draft, and this is where I think I definitely differ from some folks that are much more staunch in the zero beer world. It's like, I actually do think we can measure running back talent, at least to an extent, how much that matters. Like
I completely agree with that.
Okay. Because I've heard a lot of people that are like, running back talent, whatever, it's not worth, like, I think that like we could super measure running back talent. And I think that this 2020 class was awesome. And so, my take was like, can we just take, like, what if we just go hard at this 2020 class, and then we can use them for 2-3 years and trade them off, hopefully before the cliff comes. And it was looking really great until Cam Akers tore Achilles. That hurt a lot of my dynasty teams, which is very unfortunate. But I think to me, it's I don't know, it's interesting in the value fluctuations where the wide receivers hold the value. They're a lot more stable, and that's a huge advantage to going light running back investment in Dynasty. But at the same time, the running backs have, it's league dependent, but at least in a lot of leagues, the top running backs have so much trade value that it's like, if you can get one of these young guys and ride them for a couple of years and get off, before the age apex, before the end of the first contract, and still get that production, it's like, to me, that's just the asset escalator. It's like, if I can get this guy as a rookie the top rookies are often productive right away, more so than wide receivers. It's like, I'll draft, get these guys that can help you win now. They can help you win next year. They can help you win the next year. And then absolutely see you later. And you just, you get burnt sometimes, definitely on the injuries. But to me, it's so different versus in a managed league, especially, even more than best ball. It's like in managed league, I'm always taking one elite running back at most. And often, I'm not addressing running back really at all because I don't know. I'm winning fantasy leagues last year where it's like I'm starting Wayne Gallman every freaking week. I'm starting J.D. McKissick every week in managed leagues. I remember starting Orleans Darkwa once upon a time every week in managed leagues, like Tim Hightower. You can start with the grossest people possible. But in Dynasty, like when you're constantly trying to improve the value of your roster year to year to year, like you can soak up those points, but those guys aren't worth anything. And it's how many L's can you take at the beginning of the season when especially the waiver wires are they're not nearly as plentiful because people have 20 people on their bench, 15 guys on their bench. And so to me, I just, it's hard for me to stomach like constantly trading for the cheap running backs. Like, I don't want to be the guy trading for Mike Davis this year because I need an RB2. And I just know that at the end of the year, he's going to be worth nothing. Like I don't want to be that guy. And that's why I always try to make more of an effort to stabilize my running back situation in Dynasty, at least the top two.
I'm going cheaper when I'm trying to accumulate like bums. Because sometimes the bums are turning into like startable weeks, but I do agree with you with the running back point. Chase, you want to jump in here? I feel like
no, you're good. I just want to bring up the fact that I think it depends on how you're trying to build when it comes to starting up your teams. Like you could get bums on your team 100% as long as you get a couple studs and you're building for the future. Maybe you need some replacements in there from week to week. Meanwhile, like I don't want a rookie wide receiver core on my team with veteran running backs. I know that rookie wide receivers have been better as of late, but I don't want to sit there and draft like a Mike Davis, for example, and a Chris Carson when I have Jamar Chase, Rashad Bateman and Terrace Marshall, Rondell Moore, like on my roster. Like I try to sit there and strategize. So in startups, it really depends on what everybody else does. And it's the only draft that I'm ever reactive versus proactive, unless I start to feel myself like catching on to something. For redraft, I'm proactive. For best ball, I'm proactive. For Dynasty, I'm reactive because I want to put myself in a position to win for multiple years in a row. And guess what? I don't care about acquiring value, and improve my team every single year. I want to win for 2 or 3 years, cut my losses, and then start from scratch. Because guess what? If you win for 2 seasons in a row, 3 seasons in a row, you pay for yourself for like 30 years, essentially, of Dynasty. Like you're playing for free. You're playing a house money for 30 years. So why not go in and get into a rebuild? Maybe not 30 years. I'm exaggerating. But you're playing a house money for
you're right.
10, 15 years.
Winning is a big deal.
Oh, for sure. I think your team can like almost rebuild itself to a degree. Like I go the opposite of what you're saying. I would never want to have a team with a bunch of rookie wide receivers and a bunch of vet running backs, right? That's DOA. But like, I think you can have a team with a bunch of young running backs or, a few and older wide receivers. I mean, to me, I always have picks. Like I always have future picks. It's never in question. And to me, our edge, like as much as I feel confident we can evaluate running back talent, our edge at wide receivers way higher, right? Like it's so much easier to look at wide receivers when they come out of the draft and be like, this guy performs like wide receivers who are studs. This guy absolutely didn't. He's Kadarius Toney, right? And it's just like you just don't take those guys. And so I would rather be drafting wide receivers. And so it's like if I can have these high position a lot of my teams, if I can have young running backs, like super young, right? Like if I can have Swift, Dobbins, Akers, Etienne, and it's like I have these guys. I'm crying, man. I haven't gotten over it, dude. Like it hurts. Anyway, so it's like, if I have these guys, it's like, all right, I ride them for a couple of years, and these guys are on the trade escalator. It's like you ride them for a couple of years, and you trade them for the younger guys. These guys are on a trade escalator, and the wide receivers on a draft escalator. It's like, oh, like who's cheap as hell right now? It's like Keenan Allen. Like nobody cares. Like, he's going around 7 startups half the time. It's like I'll take the 2 wide receiver ones. And then I'll just draft the wide receivers, I
know that a lot of people that we're talking to are in like home leagues and stuff. That's probably 90% of our clientele. But when you're in sharp leagues like that, it's almost like not how it works. Like, could you have traded a CMC and got or a CMC for Jonathan Taylor plus like 2 first round picks? Yeah. In an experts league, no. In a home league, yes.
I think yes. Like especially in the middle of last season.
Yeah. I think, the middle of last season, people were saying it was Trent Richardson. So I think you could have maybe gotten a third. No, but you're not getting 2 first. I mean, like the leagues that I'm in a lot of these like They're like high. They're not like they're like medium stakes dynasty leagues.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of trade activity, and I'm pretty sure I could move Christian McCaffrey for, Jonathan Taylor and a first, let's say. But that's not really the type of move that I want to be making here. But just because I feel like I could really use Christian McCaffrey. But so like one thing that I did that's like somewhat similar to what you're saying, Jacob, is like I had Miles Sanders. I had taken him in the startup, and I got off him for Antonio Gibson. And so like that's – and I had to give up – I think I had to give up a first, and I got the piece back or something like that. And it's a late first. So I feel pretty good out, giving up the first plus – I forget. We got something. But but that's like the type of move – like everything you're saying about kind of continually trading the young running backs, I think makes a lot of sense. In Dynasty, all of the young running backs are priced like they're going to become the next superstar, right? So like Josh Jacobs for a long time was so expensive.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just
Joe
like,
Mixon.
because he's going to Joe Mixon. Exactly. Like all these guys are priced like they're going to be the 101 in like 2 years. And so you need to be moving off as soon as you think this guy's not going to ever be the 101, you got to get rid of him. So like, I'm actually more willing to hold McCaffrey, who is the 101, rather than, Miles Sanders or something. Like as soon as I start to get a little bit queasy about a guy like that, I want out because I want to reset my trade.
So fragile.
Yeah. And DeAndre Swift, no one's going to give up on DeAndre Swift. I mean, they might next offseason, but they're not going to right now.
Yeah, I think most of my Akers and Swift, like those are from the rookie drafts, to be honest. Well, Akers last year got so cheap, I couldn't resist. And then that just, got sad. But anyways, thank you, Pat and Chase, for what was a really, really fun discussion. Maybe if this episode, if you guys enjoyed it, I can always tell Shane to just sit another one out someday. Just kidding, Shane. We love you, buddy. And we know you're watching because you just commented in the group chat. So love you, Shane. How about this? We will end off here. Pat, let everybody know where they can find you if they somehow aren't already following you and reading you and listening to you.
Yeah, so all of my content, written content over at NBC Sports Edge. I'm also hosting the Good Football Show episodes on Tuesday at 2:30. We stream live to YouTube. You can always find that on wherever you get your podcasts as well. And then with Pete Overzet, I do Ship Chasing every Wednesday at 9:15. We are entering the that podcast is about high stakes fantasy football drafts. And we are about to do an ungodly amount of drafts as we get here in the heart of draft season. So you'll probably come across you. Yeah. But yeah, so that's everything I got going on right now.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Pat. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you coming on. I mean, you're an analyst that I really enjoyed reading before I ever got a Twitter account. So it was super fun to get the opportunity to chop it up with you, and I'm really glad that you came on. I'm sure everyone listening today definitely got something out of it. And Chase, where can people find you?
Oh man, so many places. You guys can find me at the grocery store. Now you guys can go check me out on Twitter, @FF_intervention. You guys can find me at join our circle _ over there on Twitter for our group. You guys can find our website over there at fantasyintervention.com, where we just released our rankings about a week ago or so. Getting a lot of feedback on that. It's mostly positive, unless it's from Facebook, then it's completely negative. But that's cool because we expect that. And then, of course, you guys can go check us out on youtube.com/fantasyintervention. Make sure you guys hit subscribe, youtube.com/fantasyintervention.
Thank you so much, Chase, for joining me as always. And you can find me on Twitter at @FF_RTDB. You can find my written work up on playerprofiler.com. You can find my most recent series. Part 1 is up, and Part 2 will be coming out, I believe, tomorrow, on applications from large field DFS tournaments into best ball tournaments. I think that's a really fun series I've been working on. I'm excited to wrap that up and have it posted tomorrow or sometime later this week. And you can find me on Fridays on the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast with Thomas Tipple and Big Billy FF. And, of course, here every Tuesday with Chase and almost always Shane. Thanks again, Pat. Thanks again, Chase. And thanks so much to the audience for sticking with us. And, Chase, you had one more thing you need to say?
Yeah, I just got approved for my article to go up on Player Profiler.
Oh, see, what you got? What do you got for us?
It's an article on David Johnson. You want to talk about it?
Oh, my God. All right, now I'm ending the broadcast.